Good morning, and welcome to part 3 of our study of the book of Ecclesiastes. This book was evidently written by King Solomon in the latter years of his life, and it really reports to be a reflection of what he had done and on his feelings of what life is like in his latter years, especially without a relationship with God. During the first part of his reign as king and early part of his life, Solomon walked with God consistently. But in the latter part of his life, he became under the influence of other gods and other deities and began to turn away from God, the true God, and lost that relationship. And so he's writing this book from the perspective of no true personal God relationship in your life, from a purely secular point of view. Now, Solomon has accomplished many things during his life, but he ends up with this summary in the very second verse of chapter 1 that everything is vanity, everything is really fleeting, everything really is meaningless insofar as the meaning of life as a whole is concerned. And he talks during the first part of chapter 1 about the futility and the frustration of living. No matter what you do, no matter what you accomplish, it really is nothing new. The world goes on as it always has. The winds swirl around, the seas fill up with rain, and then the hydroponic cycle repeats itself all over again. Rain falls, fills up the rivers, fills up the sea again. He talks about the sun always rising and always setting, in a sense that nothing really changes, despite what we do. Despite the fact that we live, go on, we die, even our memory does not exist for long. How many people of 150 years ago do you remember? Do you really relate to? And even the ones that you know about, we don't really know. So what he says at the end of the first part of chapter 1 is that generations come and generations go, and that even those people who pass away are no longer remembered, as the people of today will no longer be remembered by those who come after us. So there's a futility and a frustration in his life and in the way he expresses himself. And then he gets now into how he understands this and how he knows this to be. So he gets into the second part of chapter 1, and he talks about knowing things from the point of view of wisdom. And he says that I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. And I set my heart to work and to search for not by wisdom concerning all that is done under heaven. This independence lack of God is given to the sons of man, by which they may be exercised. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and indeed all is vanity and grasping for the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be numbered. I communed with my heart, saying, Look, I have attained privileges, greatness, and have strained and have gained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. My heart has understood great wisdom and knowledge, and I set my heart to know wisdom and to know both madness and futility and folly. I perceive that this also is grasping for the wind, for in much wisdom is much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. It was said that Solomon was given more wisdom than anyone who was before him in Jerusalem, that God gave him the ability to have wisdom and knowledge more than anyone else. So if there was someone qualified to search out for the meaning of life by the means of wisdom, it was Solomon. And Solomon also had the time and the abilities to do this. He was king in Jerusalem for over 40 years, at a time when there was actually no wars of any great significance. He reigned during a period of peace, and therefore he had the time to devote to this rather than to the military. And so he searched under all sorts of wisdom and knowledge to try to find the meaning of life. And he says that this was really a burdensome task. This searching for knowledge is a burdensome task that God has given to man, to search out what is really exists in this world and the means by which it comes about. This is a task which men have done for years. Science, geography, geology, all these fields that go into searching for what goes on in the world. None of it is really new. Science doesn't make new discoveries other than the fact that they unveil what has already been there for the most part. As he says, this is a burdensome task which we have set before us, to try to find out what makes the world tick. And having done this, he went into all disciplines of wisdom, knowledge, and he says this is still all vanity. Josh McDowell, in his book, who did a lot of teaching in colleges, used to say that if knowledge and wisdom were the epitome of man's being, then obviously PhDs, colleges, should be the ultimate of all man's achievements. But as we know, that doesn't really occur. We don't really understand the meaning by knowledge, and the more we find out, the more questions we answer, the more questions arise. And the more we know about the universe, for instance, we know really that we know less about it all the time. We understand that most of the universe is made of a substance called black matter, which no one really understands about, but no one really knew about this until more investigation was done into the universe and into its origins. So, man, by knowledge, really finds out very little. And what it says essentially is that the more we know, the more, for in much wisdom is much grief. So the more we know that we don't know, and therefore the more we try to find out. And he who increases knowledge increases sorrow for the same reason. We used to say in school that the more we study, the more we learn. The more we learn, the more we forget. The more we forget, the less we know, so why study? Sort of the same idea. The more we learn in science, the more we learn about the world, the more we realize we don't really know very much. And this therefore becomes the idea that the sorrow is more wisdom. It says also, what is crooked cannot be made straight. We all know that life has its ups and downs, has its pitfalls, has its potholes, that there are turns and weaves in our lives as we go on, and no matter what we do, these things develop. And this is really what he's referring to. What is crooked cannot be made straight. This is why it says in Luke, quoting Isaiah again, that every valley shall be filled, and every mountain and hill brought low. The crooked places shall be made straight when you know God. So Solomon looked at wisdom and really found little in wisdom to give the meaning of life. So therefore in chapter 2 he said, in my heart, come now, I will test you with mirth. Therefore enjoy pleasure. So he says, I'll try entertainment, I'll try mirth, I'll try pleasure, I'll try laughter. And apparently during this time the palace was a very party type place. You can just picture it being something like an ongoing party of laughter and gaiety and mirth. But he said, even in this madness, even in this laughter was just nothing more but madness, and mirth had no fulfillment in it. What does it accomplish, he says in chapter 2? I searched in my heart to gratify my flesh with wine. So therefore he turned to other pleasures. In other words, what he's saying is entertainment of any type. Wine, women, song may have fleeting benefits, fleeting pleasures, but it doesn't last. There's nothing really that satisfies or gives you meaning in life. He says, I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine, also while girding my heart with wisdom. So he never became intoxicated to the point of not knowing what he was doing, but he did try wine, he did try alcohol, but also watching to see what it was like, how it did affect him. And he said, well, guiding my heart with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the sons of man to do under heaven all the days of their lives. But he did say, none of this was really good. None of this gave the meaning of life. It was all in the end just folly. The fleeting pleasures that may come don't last for long. And therefore people who undertake this find it in the end, when the pleasure itself is over, when the event is over, when the party's over, in the end, they're just as bad off as they were before. It is all just vanity. So then he says, I tried it in works. I tried to put myself into working and trying to do things through my own efforts. And he says, I made my works great. Notice the fact he puts is that I did this. It was me. I made my works great. I built myself houses and planted myself vineyards. I made myself gardens and orchards, and I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made myself water pools from which to water the growing trees of the grove. I acquired male and female servants, and had servants born in my house. Yes, I had greater possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me. So he put himself into buildings, and he was known as a great builder. He built the temple. He built palaces. He built many, many structures. And this is something he thought might give him some feeling and meaning and permanence in his life. But even this did not. Even this was only transient, and all the buildings that he built are no longer there. So this was something, again, which did not give him any feeling of the real meaning of life. It just didn't accomplish. It didn't accomplish in him what he thought it might. So he therefore turned, he said, then I had acquired all sorts of servants, I had over 1,000 wives and princesses. I had greater possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me. He certainly must have had some great possessions of herds and flocks. It's been estimated, Chuck Smith in his Seath series on the Bible talks about he must have had something like 100 sheep and 30 beef cattle per day slaughtered just to feed his own family. This is in addition to any of the wild beasts, wild animals he might have gathered, the elk, the boar, the other animals he might have captured. So it's estimated that he had something like 36,000 sheep per year, and hundreds and hundreds of beef cattle, maybe 10,000 per year, slaughtered just to feed his own servants and family. So yes, he must have had great possessions of flocks in order to do this. When you have that many members in your family and your servants, they've got to be fed. So he had great possessions of herds and flocks, and all who were in Jerusalem before me. I also gathered for myself silver and gold, and the special treasures of kings and of the provinces. I acquired male and female singers, the delights of the sons of men, and musical instruments of all kinds. So entertainment, possessions of lands, possessions of flocks, possessions of palaces, none of this really seemed to satisfy him in the end. And he gold immeasurable. He was the richest man who ever lived, possibly even considering today, when you consider what his wealth of that time would be worth in today's dollars. He had 666 talents of gold yearly given to him. And in the Kings and in the section of Kings and Chronicles, it tells him that the palaces were elaborate, they were magnificent. They had many gold ornaments, golden utensils, golden furniture. In fact, he didn't really consider silver to be valuable at all. It was as paving stones, it says, in Jerusalem, because it was considered to be so inferior to the gold of Solomon. So he had everything that almost you could think of, insofar as possessions, insofar as treasures, insofar as wealth, power, prestige. He had it all. And yet he said it was all essentially worthless. Jack Higgins said in his book, or said at one time in his books, he says, when you get to the top, there's nothing there. Ernest Hemingway wrote, he said, I live in a vacuum that is as lonely only as a radio tube when the batteries are dead and there's no current to play into. So, all of these things, people who obtain great wealth, great prestige, find it's just empty at the top. Hemingway also said, life is just one damn thing after another. So, this repetitiveness, this frustration, this repetitive, futile behavior that we do throughout life, yes, it does give transient satisfaction. It does give some temporary meaning to what we do as we go through life. But it doesn't give us any long-term meaning over what we need to do in the end, or really want in the end. In chapter 2 of Ecclesiastes, Solomon also says, so I became great and excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem, and my wisdom remained with me. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my reward from all my labor. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had done, and on the labor in which I had toiled. And indeed all was vanity and grasping for the wind. There was no real profit under the sun. So Solomon accomplished many things during his lifetime, and he enjoyed many privileges during his lifetime. He enjoyed great wealth. He enjoyed great success. He enjoyed great buildings. He enjoyed great company. He had possessions of lands and flocks and gardens. He had everything that man's natural eye would seem to want. And yet at the end, when he separated from God, when he had no longer had God in his life, he looked at it all and said, it's all worthless. It's all vanity. It's all just like the wind. He's done it all, and he did it all, and he accomplished it all. And at the same time, he felt empty. He felt empty because there was no real meaning in what he did. There was no real permanence in what he did. It was just vanity. So we're going to go on next time to the next part of chapter 2 and see what Solomon has to say further, especially about the wise and the fool. I hope you'll join me for that next week. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.